You're listening to World of Empowerment Radio, your station for practical spirituality in a changing world. And here are your hosts, Angel Rose and Ahonu.
You're very, very welcome. My name is Ahonu, and with me today is Lawrence Schechter. Now, unfortunately, we don't have Angel Rose with us. She's unavailable today, and she would really have enjoyed this discussion that we're going to have, because we're talking about sustainable architecture, we're talking about harmonics with the earth. And in the past, most of our discussions really have been metaphysical in nature. They've been all about the spirit world. Today, we're actually bringing that down into the physical, and we want to talk to Lawrence about his work as an architect and how he is designing with spirit in mind, but bringing it into the physical, bringing it into the structure, and allowing the harmony of the building itself to speak with nature, and how the heavens and the earth communicate through buildings and all of that kind of thing. So we've a lot to talk about, and I know Angel Rose will be sorry that she's not here to partake in this, but nonetheless we have her with us in spirit, in the sense that I know the kind of things that she will want to talk about with you, so I will ask those appropriate questions as well. Great. So you're very, very welcome, Lawrence. Give us a little bit of background about yourself first, like how come you as an architect, which is usually a pretty 3D kind of a business, how you connected spirit with what you do?
Well, I have over 45 years of architectural experience, gone through the College of Hard Knocks as well, to begin with, starting at the University of Illinois. And after graduating there about over 50 years ago, found that working in the corporate world was not very satisfying, although it was architecturally significant and did a number of really important buildings that have contributed to the mainstream. But I found that there was something essential that was missing, and that was a sense of purpose in the larger scheme of things.
Right.
And when solar architecture began to surface in the 60s and 70s, I recognized there was a pathway that made a lot of sense, and in fact connected us to the larger environment. And as inhabitants of a cosmic outplay of all of our reality, I recognize that we have a part to play in that context that goes way beyond just constructing buildings that are part of common sense.
But I'd love to know how you connect into that part, because we've had many discussions in the past, Angel Rose and I, and our broader kind of spiritual community, about being able to downstep spirit into your life, you know, but usually it takes a kind of a metaphysical or ethereal kind of a way. Do you do what you do as an architect by somehow envisioning what spirit would look like in a building, or give us an idea of how it manifests into a building?
That's a very interesting question. I suppose a lot of it has to do with my background of many years practicing meditation, so that it became very easy for me to become conscious of my higher self.
Right.
And be able to converse with that higher self.
Right.
Recognizing that there was really no disconnection at all. And that the more I remained focused in that larger context, the more the power and the light came through. And I recognized that my intuition was very much activated in that process. And it was at first a sense that, well, this is like the spiritual world or the source of spirit speaking to me. Mm-hmm. And then as I matured through this process, I recognized that there wasn't any separation, where spirit and I were not one and the same.
Okay.
I mean, yes, obviously, for many of us, we recognize we're spiritual beings, yes, having a physical life experience.
Yes. Yeah.
And so connecting to that timeless quality, okay, that infinite quality,
yes,
becomes more and more natural.
Now, there's one project in particular that we want to talk about, or we want to zone in on today.
Yeah.
And that's your latest project. But when I say latest, though, it's something you've been working on for quite some time.
Yeah.
And you've been drawing on this spiritual downstepping and this insight and this intuition that you've just spoken about.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about the origins of that, and then bring it all up to today.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. I was commissioned some time ago by some people who called me on the phone and said, "We don't know who you are, but we think you're the architect we're looking for."
Okay, I like that.
And yeah, I liked that one too. And they described to me a project that they were getting inner direction to develop. And they bought some property at Mount Shasta, having traversed all the way across from upper state New York. Mm. And they started to describe to me on the phone this spiritual center that would be a retreat set aside from the normal business community in an area that was very much imbued by the power and the beauty of nature.
Okay.
And of course, Mount Shasta is one of those extremely powerful spiritual places on earth. Mm-hmm. And that would contribute greatly to that environment. And they described some of the references that they had in mind, and as well as having an idea that it would be a place for people to live together for perhaps a week or two under the same roof and have a variety of experiences that would then become catalysts for optimizing their experience and their creativity, mm-hmm, and their sense of wholeness. So,
well, what would have been different about that, though? Because there are many retreat centers, yeah, available to people. There are many conference centers, and they would all perhaps aspire to have people communicating at a deeper level, communing with each other, building rapport.
Yeah.
So what was really essentially different about this idea?
Well, they hadn't mentioned it at the time, and I wasn't aware of it at the time either, except that it did come to me, mm-hmm, a little later, and that was when, after I had said to them, "Well, I recognize what you're talking about here because I got a similar input on this several weeks ago, and I know exactly what you're talking about. So let's get together," and we did. And then I said, "Well, you will need to be very patient here because this cannot just come through my experience and skill alone. It has to come through inspiration as well."
Okay.
And primarily. But I didn't have that experience to draw from. I just intuitively knew that was the case. Mm. And in fact, about a month later, I was in a room with 12 other people, and the love energy in the room was so powerful, I characterize it as like liquid gold.
Okay, wow.
So it was like the optimum kind of love manifested, mm-hmm, in one's entire being. And it was on the power and the beauty of that vibration that I received this beam of light that just came right down into my head, and it struck me with this visual imprint of the geometry of this retreat center. And I brought along a little sketch to show you what that was, okay?
Yeah.
So here is the initial sketch that I did. It was on a little 3x5, and I just drew up what came to mind, or came into my perception at the time, as a square for the building, and then inside the square was set at 45 degrees to the main square, was another square and a superimposed square on that created like an 8-pointed star with a central rotunda or atrium space that had a bridge through it that related to the cardinal points.
Okay.
And then I enlarged it.
Now, I must comment on this particular little sketch, because I know Angel Rose would be attracted to that simply because she's aware that an offset of 45 degrees is an entry into like a portal to another dimension, and an offset of 90 degrees is actually stepping into another harmonic universe.
Right.
So this is very interesting in the beginning. And then, of course, you have the square, which would be like the base of a pyramid.
Right.
You have the 4s, and you also have the 8s, and they're significant numbers.
Absolutely.
And it's all about stability and strength.
Exactly. Right.
Okay.
And then we also have the quadrants of, in this case, these were sleeping rooms divided into 4, so there would be, in fact, 16 of them. And this enlargement of that plan just followed on that initial imprint. And I was able to record more information there, including the dimension of the building, about 80 feet across, and one of the diagonals of the inner square was 67 feet in round numbers, and so on. And
so this was coming down to you in a flash, like
exactly.
And you're trying to sketch it out as quickly as you possibly can.
I had never had that experience before.
Okay.
Or since, as a matter of fact.
Really interesting.
And this was the vital difference in the ingredient that you were alluding to just a while ago, and that is the sacred geometry that's inherent in that. And that it has a power to connect us with a timeless pattern of nature and human consciousness.
Okay, interesting.
That's that we are sacred geometry.
Yes.
Our
indeed.
very DNA is made up of sacred geometric configuration.
Yeah. So how did this develop then? So now you had a download of information, you had a rough idea of what like a floor plan might look like. And how did that move forward then to fulfill the need of this particular group who said we want a retreat center?
Right. Well, over a period of time, I waited until the inspiration came back again, and I was able to carry forward in a very interactive level of consciousness, evaluating options of how to take this geometry in its concept into a practical configuration as a floor plan. And that this turned out to be the basis for a second floor plan, and then taking that imprint as a catalyst or a transparent pattern for developing the ground floor plan. So and the early plans allowed me to come up with a configuration that very much maintained the sacred geometry. And I can show you a photograph of the architectural model that I had built there that's looking down on the top of the space with a central meditation level at the third level, above the second floor bedrooms, suites, and then that in turn is above the daytime activity areas.
Now, might I say, this reminds me of a crystal or a snowflake even.
Yeah.
It seems to be perfectly geometrical on all, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah. Well, it's also like a mandala.
Okay.
And or crystal. So it takes on the harmonics of that kind of geometry that orders energy in the environment and therefore in our own psychological and spiritual makeup. And so by having those harmonic relationships, it helps to optimize us and move us into a higher dimension of consciousness and co-creation.
Right.
And as we all know, science has indicated that we use only maybe 5 to 10% of our brain capacity.
If even.
If even that, yes.
Okay.
And so this will be an environment that will enhance our consciousness and those connections that are inherently waiting for us to tap.
Okay. Now, we've had, Angel Rose and I, over the last numbers of weeks and months, spoken to several people about Feng Shui.
Yeah.
And they were talking about the layout and the energy flow in a building. Did Feng Shui play any part in your thinking when you were looking at this design?
Yes. Feng Shui, as you know, has a number of different facets of it, one of which is out of necessity for protection against
right.
Dark forces. Another has to do with the positive energy buildup that can be created by putting the components together in an
Yes.
effective way. And certainly I've had to work with both sides of that issue.
Okay.
Because in this case, this geometry lends itself to transparency. You can see, for instance, as we look at the different levels here of the drawing, the plan, superimpose the model, that's the top floor. This is the second floor. And then the ground floor, where in the ground floor alone, we have an opening that is transparent through the building along its diagonal axes as well as the cardinal directions. Now, according to Feng Shui, transparency through a building is not a good thing because it doesn't contain energy. But in this case, transparency will be an enhancement for a conscious connection with the larger kind of cosmic direction that we are in. And we will use things perhaps like crystals and other devices that will help prevent the loss of energy through those.
Okay.
And enhance the perception of our relationship between the built environment and the natural environment.
Mm-hmm. So when you were conceiving this now, you mentioned that the original sketch you realized would become the first floor. So how do you build up the layers of functionality? And what I mean by that then is coming right down into the practical 3D level that you need elevators and stairs and storage rooms and toilets and stuff.
Right.
So at what stage does all that come into your thinking?
Very soon, because it has to have a practical function. And that's the alchemy that takes place, where you're dealing with this kind of spiritual energy and purpose and the functional requirements.
Right.
And even, obviously making it conform with current codes and building practices and all the rest of that. That takes a full synthesis of that yin and yang kind of interplay.
Well, not being an architect now, I always wondered, how do you marry the need to conform with, as you say, building practices and codes and all of that with this spiritual guidance that you're talking about here? So you have a meeting space, for example, and you want it to conform to certain sizes, but at the same time is in your mind going on, well, it can't be bigger than this, or it can't be smaller than that, or it has to...
Yeah.
Is that what's happening?
Well, there is that, indeed.
Right.
However, the normal approach would be to apprehend the physical requirements first. And of course the psychological, but the interplay of sacred geometry and subtle energies, feng shui and so on, would normally be less dominant at first and would come into play to help you to raise the vibration, so to speak,
Yes.
of the physical environment so that you do have the physical environment really performing its required functions, serving the purposes of the building, and also rendering it in a way that makes it optimized in terms of its purpose according to spiritual principles.
Okay. And would you have encapsulated early on in that initial download, would you have got the image, let's call it, of the entire project? And what I mean is that it's going to have 16 rooms, 56 rooms, it's going to be 4 stories, 10 stories. You know, would you have had all that information at that point?
No.
Okay.
No, that's an iterative process. You know, the initial seed idea is planted deep within, and the co-creative process of my own intelligence,
Right.
and its elevated counterpart, shall we say,
Right. Yeah.
in the spirit realm, come into play, and it's a dance as we go through the process, and things get adjusted. It's just like a rocket ship sent off to another planet. You know, it's sent off in a general direction, in a specific direction, but we are always having to adjust
Fine-tune it.
the direction
Right.
through fine-tuning in order to get there.
Right.
And so in this process, the fine-tuning has to do with all the practical things as well.
So that fine-tuning is now at a point where it conforms with all the building codes. It fulfills the function of the retreat center. It has the meeting rooms and all of that functionality that's necessary. It has its position. You will position it in terms of the cardinal directions. It's got the sacred geometry. What other considerations were there, like light, for example? Tell us about how you thought about how you would maximize the light from the north, south, east, or west, or that kind of thing.
Yeah, perhaps we could use this model
Sure,
in that case.
yeah.
We can see here a model built of the design. It has a translucent roof so that we can see the relationship of the exterior to the interior, but of course that the only portion that will be transparent would be the skylight above the central atrium space. And it's very much like a pyramid in a sense. It has a 6 and 12 roof pitch, and which is very typical in the building industry. And the model shows us a lot of what you're saying, Ahonu, in terms of how light is brought into the building. We have light coming in over the atrium through the skylight, and that will have computer-operated screen devices to edit the light, to prevent it from being overly overpowering, or to darken it entirely at times during the day, and insulate it at night. But in general, it'll light up this central space, which is a space of celebration and general activities, and it will also provide light over these higher walls that allow these clear stories to provide illumination into all of these 8 surrounding bedrooms from this central space. And so that's, again, like a spiritual principle of the ratcheting of light down into the earth through a single source. And the outer 8 bedrooms, which you see here, are oriented in an hourly direction and have light coming in from them. And they also open out to a corner-covered deck in each of these quadrants. So there are 4 bedrooms in each of these quadrants, which correspond with the original sketch. And then, as you can see, there is the square that is set within the larger square. This is 80 feet on the side, and then this touches the outer perimeter of the 80-foot square, and that becomes 67 feet in round numbers. And at the corner of each of those points of the square, we open up to the cardinal directions and provide light into those spaces, as well as view directly through the spaces that also correspond with this walkway that connect all four of these quadrants.
Yeah.
The downstairs spaces are seen, as you can see here, that these have a setback of wall that allows the upper story to be solid, and this is void below, and it correspondingly has solid below and open above there, and only these corner elements, these corner of the
Inner square.
Thank you, are full height, and that allows light to penetrate throughout those spaces.
Huh.
And so the downstairs spaces are activity rooms, and I can show you on the updated plan what that will look like.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a quick little break right here and remind our listeners that we're speaking with Lawrence Schechter, and he is an architect on a mission, actually, because it's a wonderful project that you've developed here, and it brings harmony into the building space, into the living space, into the accommodation, into the meeting rooms, and is very much in line with sacred geometry and sacred principles and feng shui and all of that. But do stay with us. We'll be right back after this break.
Years of research, thousands of profound statements, hundreds of sessions, miles of transcripts, months of listening, a vast archive of personal power and spiritual awareness awaits you. Join worldofempowerment.com today, a members-only website of practical spirituality for your fast-changing world. worldofempowerment.com.
Ahonu's book, The Reincarnation of Columbus, is his true story of the loss of his first child, his pain and struggle with grief, and the guilt that followed. It forms his entire philosophy of life, and is a superb rendering of the unfolding of spiritual awareness. The Reincarnation of Columbus is a true epic voyage from the pain and sorrow of a father's grief to a new world of empowerment, love, and forgiveness. Get your copy on Amazon.com or on Kindle for $2.99 by searching for AHONU, or visit http://thereincarnationofcolumbus.com. That's all one word, thereincarnationofcolumbus.com.
Okay, you're welcome back. My name is Ahonu, and I have Lawrence Schechter with me, an architect who is into sacred geometry. He's on a mission with a particular design that we're speaking about now. And before the break, we were talking in general about his design process, how it came down to him, how he gets the idea, how he knows that it's in line with spirit and it fulfills all the necessary functionality at the same time. So now we want to talk more about your mission, really, how that's now pouring out into the community. Tell us what's happening, where it came from, and how it's now flowing out into the actual development of this project.
Well, the source of all of this was a process of redefining what I felt was the higher calling for architectural practice. And I had felt that with all of the technological advances in modern contexts of building, we have only begun to scratch the surface of a higher order of purpose that will help to optimize the support of our development as conscious beings in the world.
Right.
And we can see today there's a tremendous need for that because we have so many problems around the world. And a lot of it has to do with just limiting ourselves to the three-dimensional, the gravitational component that is important, but not an end unto itself. Mm-hmm. And so sustainability is really a means to an end. It's not an end unto itself. In other words, it's a strategy for survival.
Okay.
And we need to survive in order to thrive, and that's our real purpose.
Right. And innovate. And isn't this innovation?
That's right.
In action.
That's right. And that's right. And so when we think in spiritual terms, we're within the context of the grand creation.
Okay.
And we are part of that creation. And we are the fingers of the creative source, you know.
Mm-hmm. So talk to us about how this came, like your mission statement, effectively.
Yeah. Right.
Describe
so
it.
This particular project is one that has a purpose to advance human consciousness by providing an environment that would optimize the conditions for operating at that higher level.
Okay.
And it will provide an environment where people can come together in a small focus group, say we have 16 bedrooms. It could be either single or double occupancy, where they would live together for 5 to 7 days, perhaps even longer in some cases, with a number of different programs and resource people who are leaders in their fields to work with these individuals so that they will be able to go beyond the constraints of their normal operating mentality. Say, for instance, political leaders. If we get 16 political leaders here, some of whom are adversaries, to be able to live together for that period of time. They have activities, they eat together, there's a whole programmatic focus on advancing their ability to question the way things are and look at what it would be if we, for instance, were able to create peace on earth rather than perpetuating this separation that
and I know that many
to protect us, you know.
Well, I know that many of our listeners would ask the question right now that what is it about this particular building that would allow them to ask the what if question or to look towards peace, as opposed to any meeting in any other hotel or convention center or government building and asking the same question?
Well, I believe that the spiritual inspiration for the design was intended for this purpose, so that people could be in an environment that had the sacred geometry, the proportions, the use of light, and the challenges the environment provides for people to grow and to perceive beyond the limits of their present MO. And by providing an environment that is set apart from a hotel environment that would be surrounded by a lot of distractions and current conditions that prevent us from going beyond a certain level, this, by contrast, will be like a Zen temple in a way, in its own way, to help really concentrate on the energetic expansion of possibilities of higher intellectual and mental, psychological confluence with one another. So I can see how the breakthroughs that we have experienced with a lot of leaders who throughout history have seen conditions from a different perspective than the norm, and they have been the visionaries who have brought forth a transformation in our world. And that's what this kind of building is oriented to, especially with the mandala type configuration and the geometry, it's going to have an energetic influence on the participants in terms of their physiological and their mental and spiritual experience. And I feel that the environment can do so much to bring that about, because it's like a tuning fork, as we've experienced in places like Chartres Cathedral and many others. It's a challenging environment that opens doors in terms of your perception and your yearning to understand and to be more whole, rising to that occasion.
So when you mentioned Chartres Cathedral, do you feel that inner knowledge that led them to the construction of that particular building and several others, do you think that got lost somewhere along the way?
It was largely lost, yes. Fortunately, there have been enough people who could recognize what has been preserved in the proportions, the geometry, and so on, and in the windows, what have you, the way light penetrates the darkness, to help us to understand what they were doing.
Right.
And this is what a large part of the intention here is, to provide doorways of perception.
Now, I have to ask you, in some ways, how is this different? Because in Chartres Cathedral, for example, you've got flying buttresses and you've got all kinds of amazing pieces of design that were necessary to support that particular structure. Plus you had the relationship with the sacred geometry. Now, are those principles carried through here, like the golden mean ratio? And
Right, they are. As a matter of fact, now the design has been modified somewhat since its initial conception 40 years ago to include more updated requirements for bedrooms, all to have their own bath and so on, but also to incorporate a different way of registering the sacred proportions. For instance, the golden mean proportion, which is expressed throughout nature, is expressed in the atrium space, which is 27 feet across on each side of the square. Well, the diagonal of that square is 38.12 feet, which is a function of the golden mean proportion, which is 0.618 on to about 50 different decimal points.
Yes.
Well, if you subtract that from one unity, you have 0.318, a lot of digits after that. Well, that diagonal through the atrium space is 100 times that. It's 38.12 feet.
Okay, yes.
See, and there are many ways that we can slice that apple, but it inevitably comes back to a proportion that of the golden mean as a symbol and as a more than a symbol, a kind of a nucleus of this whole. And that geometry then is going to be something that has a energetic resonance. That's how I can, that's the best way I can describe it, that will be felt.
Okay.
And when you're in a space that has a golden mean proportion in it, that is a prominent element, there's an element there that is very subtle, and you can't generally tell what it is that makes it feel so profound, and so natural and uplifting. It's usually that.
Right. Now, many people will be aware of the Fibonacci spiral as being part of nature.
Right.
And you mentioned about the proportions being in here. Are there any other aspects of this particular design which would demonstrate the Fibonacci spiral?
Well, the Fibonacci is almost exactly the same as the golden mean spiral, with very minor differences in it. It's more a function of the dimensions of the building, which correspond across the four sides to the diameter of the Earth at the equator. We have 80 feet nominally on each side. Well, the Earth diameter at the equator is just almost exactly 8,000 miles. So we have a correspondence here that's kind of a microcosm of the Earth. And we have the nucleus at the atrium, the place of the light penetration into the other spaces that embodies the golden mean proportion. Right. And so those two work together as a concept that is embodied. And we'll also have a pendulum that will be suspended from the underside of the roof and go through the an opening in the walkway, the bridge through there. And that, of course, will represent the gravitational influences on this specific location.
Or even the heartbeat of the Earth.
Yes, exactly.
It'll
that's another way to say it.
Wow.
And so that, too, will raise one's awareness of our context within the larger whole. And that is, when you see that in a museum, you look at this, it's a virtual perpetual motion machine that is created by the gravitational forces of the Earth on its axis around the sun.
And it will swing on its own without any...
Absolutely, yeah. Once it's set off on its own, the gravitational force will push it from one side to the other.
What a marvelous centerpiece.
Yeah, right.
Gosh, yeah.
And so, when we're thinking of a place that will blend the best of art and science and governance, which is the principal themes, of course, there will be, and that within a more spiritual, universal context, how we see our place in the larger whole, the larger situation of energy and co-creation, will be a source of inspiration. So people will see, okay, I'm called upon to rise above my present prejudices, beliefs, and limitations, and be open to grow into this larger reality that is all accessible.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
We are the only limits to that access.
Now, you did mention, well, let me remind people first, I'm speaking with Lawrence Schechter, architect of an absolutely wonderful design, really, for that is sustainable, it's harmonic, a wonderful building that will be a retreat centre. And you've mentioned the words sustainable quite some time, several times. Is there the facility here to generate solar power, for example, or grow your own vegetables, or, tell me about how, when you use the word sustainable, what do you mean?
Indeed. Yes. Yeah. Well, let's have a look at this roof. One point. Thank you very much. Okay. So each of these four facets of the roof will be facing a cardinal direction, and say this is the north side, which is the entry side, and the south side is facing where the solar energy is most heavily concentrated during the daytime. And on that entire facet of the roof, we will have photovoltaic array. And that will provide the majority of electrical energy that will be necessary to run this entire building.
And would it be enough from that section of the roof to run the building?
Well, yes, mainly because we'll also be conserving electrical use in the building with a more advanced technology for greater efficiency.
Right.
And we will also have solar greenhouses on the south side. So here, on the ground floor, here and here, that will provide some passive solar energy as well as fresh vegetables that will be grown there for consumption in the building. Fantastic. And we will use a lot of the effluent that will be the liquid, the gray water for underground irrigation. We will be conserving water from the roof in underground cisterns for irrigation purposes as well. We'll have state-of-the-art technology throughout the building to conserve energy. So it will be operating at a near net zero energy performance level, which is something I've done in a number of homes.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Is this replicable? In other words, this design gets built. Is it likely that every country will want one of these, every community would want one of these, every government, every state?
It's entirely replicable. And the idea here is that we can see this being an initial stage in a process that would then grow out into a network regionally and then potentially internationally. And of course, each region would require a modification of the architecture in order to be consistent with its locale and its climate and its cultural context as well. But the interior makeup of the building would be essentially the same, and that would help then for economy's sake, where a lot of things could be prefabricated and shipped to different locations that may not have those advanced technologies yet. And then this would be part of a network of these centers that will transmit information and teachings and so on through live streaming and teleconferencing and so on, so that we could have some world-class spiritual teachers, scientists, artists, and so on to provide inspirational and informational talks that will be downloaded to all those in the network.
Wow, what a beautiful vision. And just one final question, because we do have to bring things to a close. I know also that many of our listeners and our viewers would be interested in perhaps having this as a design for their own home. Now, I know you've particularly designed this for the functionality of lots of bedrooms and meeting spaces and so on. Yeah. But is it possible to adapt that to a client's needs that said, well, look, I want all that harmony, I want that design, I want that functionality, I want the cardinal directions, I want the proportions in my own home. Is that a possibility?
Absolutely, yeah. I have had clients who have asked for some of that, and that is entirely possible depending upon the conditions of their location and what size of space and kind of budget that they have. But certainly many of these principles are transferable to their own a residential scale, and I've employed the use of the golden mean proportion in a lot of the homes that I've designed. Sometimes it's without the owner even knowing.
Okay.
It just enhances the healing quality and the resonance, the sense of peacefulness.
Isn't there a recognition in us, though? We recognize it without necessarily it being cognitive. Yeah,
Right. And often an architect will have an inner road with their clients who would be inclined to go with his or her suggestions as part of the design strategy. As long as it fulfills their basic requirements, then we can always do an enhancement, an added value, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay, Lawrence Schechter, tell people where they can get in contact with you. Give us your website and your details.
Okay. Thank you. It's schechterarchitect.com.
Do spell that out, though, because...
Okay, well, perhaps you can put it...
We will.
That's a listing.
We will, absolutely. Schechterarchitect.com.
Yeah.
Super. Okay, that brings us to the end of our program today. We're absolutely delighted for you to come in. I know, as I said in the beginning,
pleasure.
Angel Rose would have loved to have spent some time with you today. Do come back again, because we want to follow the development of this.
Okay.
We want to be able to see this as the foundation stone goes in. And we want to talk to you about the difference it's making in people's lives. So we do want to stay in touch about that.
And also there will be an opportunity for people who are so inclined to help contribute towards its manifestation financially.
Right.
So we'll get that set up.
Yes, and they will be able to do that through your website. They'll contact you through the website.
We'll work that out. It won't be
Super.
through my own personal.
Okay, all right. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
in.
My pleasure, too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Angel Rose and Ahonu on World of Empowerment Radio, your station for practical spirituality in a changing world.